Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to more Lord build nonsense, because man oh man, I could really use a distraction today. Essentially what we're going to be talking about here today is more weird Lord builds, whether they're actually useful or just kind of a stupid meme build. I just want to talk about a few different setups. Now, there were a few requests in the video last time, asking to start off covering some like beast tamer lobber bomber builds, as well as covering a potentially useful ninja build. Now, that being said, the main question on that ninja build was basically like, is a ninja itself going to be potentially useful for a sort of evanescence spammer, or is it just mostly a lord transfer skill? But no, it does actually have its purpose. So I wanted to cover a little bit of that, and so we'll go ahead and start off here with kind of the obvious here. We'll start off with a beast tamer variant. Now, this is going to be a type of build that will obviously vary depending on your preferences and situations and whatever else, but essentially what we're going to be looking at here is going to be somebody that primarily is going to be opening up with shots and then finishing off with finishers, using a built-in counterattack for the purpose of generating more MP, and using weapon skill bonuses in order to go and boost up that shot damage far more than it normally would go. So, what's the use of something like this? Isn't this a very expensive way to just not be a shaman? Well, no, not exactly. So, this is a build that I've mentioned over and over as far as being a potentially far more consistent alternative to a lot of endgame casters. So here's why. Just like a lot of magic builds, the idea with a lobber bomber here is that it's going to be a fairly consistent amount of damage. And just like, let's say, the kind of heavyweight casters in the game, it is something that can scale up particularly well with cards. Now, that being said, you can also get a good bit of the way towards that scaling early on by simply going and putting on your weapon skills instead. So, for example, in this case, while he does only have 4 attacks, the lobber bombs in this case would be, let's say, doing 700 there, 660 over there, 680 over there. It's not going to be doing any kind of weapon-based damage. This is strictly scaling off of your weapon skill. So, depending on the targets that you're running into, having an entire party of beast tamers built out like this is going to be very, very good for clearing maps quickly. As far as when you get to the point in the game where basically money's no object, you can get to the point that you just make a bunch of generic, generic beastmasters and stuff, and you simply give them weapon earrings, you give them a bunch of lobber bombs, and you just send them forward with a counterattack weapon. So the counterattack weapon is useful for the purpose of generating MP, and we're actually just going to go ahead and sub that weapon for the purpose of using a Cudgel, because normally there's that question of why the hell would a beast tamer ever use a Cudgel? And it's strictly because of the finishers. When it comes to finishes and such, the Cudgel does actually have some pretty damn solid finishers, and if you're able to get a little bit of extra goodness out of them, you know, there's really nothing terrible about it. So, like, let's say in this case we wanted to have him have a bunch of long-range kind of explosions and whatever else. There's nothing wrong with simply going and using Pressure Whirl and such over and over. So again, while generally I would prefer to use something like an axe or hammer for this, a cudgel does actually still serve this function particularly well, especially considering that if you ever have any downtime in between your attacks, you can just simply pre-charge a lot of your finishers to be able to spam them even harder. Let's say in this case, we ended up getting our Repel Beast, so we can just go ahead and keep pressure whirling over here. And again, it obviously, when it comes to kind of going and nuking something, a lot of folks are just going to prefer the sort of standard and normal stuff. In my personal preference, this has just generally been more consistent. Usually, I'll go for short bow skills and then a shield. And the reason for that is because a basic punch off of a short bow is still going to be generating MP, and you know, the finishers off a bow are going to be a lot more applicable than something like a cudgel. But still, this is just kind of a fun way to do it. So I just kind of figured I'd throw it out there. Like, the reason that you'd run something like this is, again, primarily for the free MP charge, and if you're looking to have something that's renewable here, this is certainly a way to do it. And if you happen to pick up any physical cards, you're basically seeing those lobber bombs go up to like 900, 1200, 1500. They go up a pretty decent ways. Anyways, that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next one here, which is the ninja build I was talking about. Now, I did change him into a proper ninja, because technically speaking, when it comes to, well, our situation here with the Lord and whatnot, Yeah, he actually can't use Envenom, so Lord doesn't have access to the ninja abilities, which it's kind of a bummer because Envenom's one of the best abilities in the game as far as I'm concerned. Any darn ways, though. So as far as a thing that the ninja can do here, as far as being ultra viable with Evanescence here, we basically just have to picture it a little bit differently from how you would normally picture an SRPG, in that you're not really looking specifically to go and take any kind of fights or turns or whatever else. You're specifically looking to just kind of either get in and get out, or essentially just get in and put yourself in the safe mode, as it were. So what I'm doing here is I'm combining several very specific weapons together in order to create a sort of, I guess you could say, chaos spreader kind of thing. See, the two daggers that he's using is going to be the Damask and the Dirk, so he's going for a stun and poison, as well as a silence and poison. So he's essentially rolling for three separate debuffs, one of which is guaranteed every time that he attacks. And MP-wise, this already put him up to 33 without any kind of counters or whatever else. Defensively speaking, we can go either Steel Stance or we can go Smoke Bomb. I feel like Steel Stance is just generally going to be the safer between the two. But the idea is that we're essentially only attacking for the purpose of generating MP and spreading debuffs. And the reason that the debuffs are important because if the thing's poisoned and he can just barely almost kill it, then that's going to be pretty darn useful, especially if he happens to be countering. Now you can technically go about this a different way. For example, equipping a elemental shortbow in your offhand, and just kind of counter-attacking with a dagger. Essentially just being able to get poisoned that way. And if you're doing this on Lord, you might as well just run this with the Dragon Fang. It just would be more consistent there. Anyway, so main thing to take away from this is that if you do go for any direct damage, it would primarily be done with the finishers, seeing as the finishers on the dagger are already pretty darn solid. They're usually going to be a pretty reasonable threat on their own, so you don't necessarily need to worry too much there. But the cool thing about this is that you can also, let's say, combine what we learned earlier with those explodey bombs for the exact same purpose. So while we can, let's say, use some of these other abilities for the purpose of a direct attack or what have you, instead we're going to save our points for the time being. They're just going to go do their attacks as they do. I'll just wait for them to do their stuff. With Steel Stance, we're going to be pretty decently resilient against stuff here. This version of Denim is going to be slightly stronger than you would normally have, obviously, but still. Like, he hasn't been completely charmed to an insane degree, but he just has a few more. Like, nowhere near as much as the Super Chicken. Anyway, so what we can do in this particular instance is, let's say, go up and attack something. That part would be fairly obvious. Gives us a pretty decent amount, given that we're running something like daggers. We're usually going to scale up pretty darn well off those physical cards. But once we get ourselves up to 100, what we can actually do is essentially combine in a shot grenade as well as Evanescence. So essentially just going for kind of the double attack there. Now it will game over us in this particular situation, but this is just going to be for the purpose of showing off that it's something that you can do with any of your basic ninjas there. Because again, it's just scaling off of your basic weapon attack. So like, let's say you absolutely positively needed a fight to end right now. So let's say we'd go over here. This is going to do a pretty big number on these guys. Actually, probably the better example of this would have been whatever. And then he can just basically go right into an Evanescence, and then essentially put himself into a shutdown mode here. So you can do a basic attack, or you could do something like that. Again, not really recommended to do that when you're doing it solo, but it is one potential way that you can get a bit more out of it that might be a little bit safer than the double attack. See, two things that happen with the double attack if you want to take an Evanescence safely is that A, if you happen to run into a counterattack, that might potentially be an issue. If you run into let's say, a situation where they end up parrying one of the attacks, that might be an issue. But if instead you find yourself in a position that, hey, maybe instead we might find ourselves in a position that we have a essentially unblockable, unparryable, an uncounterable attack in the form of these shots, we could essentially just work that into an Evanescence. And then basically all the rest of the time you can just go around needling with these ultra lightweight daggers for the purpose of spreading around debuffs. So either way, just kind of amusing. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of sort of Lord-centric variants on the previously discussed stuff. So let's say we still wanted to do the old lobber bomber build here, and we wanted to, let's say, incorporate some endgame weapon in there, so we didn't want to run a debuff weapon in this case, for whatever reason. You know, we just wanted to go raw stats and numbers instead of, let's say, something like poison or what have you. You know, sometimes that's something you prefer. So, what we've done in this case is we've gone and taken one of the better 1HKs in the game here, and we've gone ahead and combined that with a sword and shield build, giving him access to parry, but unfortunately, unlike the other builds here, this means that he wouldn't have access to a counterattack for that additional MP. However, he does have access to Mighty Strike and Preempt, and as we showed off last time, this does mean that he is going to be able to kind of preempt all of those attacks coming his way and still get the bonus on his katana here. Even though it's one-handed, not two-handed. So the skill specifically just says Eastern Swords, not anything to do with how many hands are being applied to the handle. So basically what this means is he can kind of do a similar version to the old counterattacking thing here, but instead he can just sort of do the swordmaster thing at the same time. So this tends to be pretty darn useful while still keeping the shield up here for the purpose of additional defense if and when he does get hit, bypassing one of the weaknesses that the swordmaster had. So in this case we can effectively have three different versions of the same thing, and then if you wanted to throw some summons in there for good measure, sure, why the hell not, they're still in there, though realistically the lobber bombs are just going to do, you know, a better job in that particular instance. So we'll just go ahead and throw them suckers over there. But if you are looking for a fun way to do a sort of a physical fighter type of build here, this works out pretty well, and you can always replace the Mighty Strike there with, let's say, a Berserk or what have you. Honestly, the Berserk probably would end up being the stronger option here, seeing as it's giving you 30% instead of 25%. But you know what? Never underestimate my ability to go and use something that's slightly more lame for the purpose of absolutely nothing, but I think it's pretty darn fun anyway. So yeah, you could also stack both of them together at the same time if you feel like it, but yeah, you want to keep your weapon finishers on there, or the weapon skill on there for the purpose of scaling up your shots, because they will go down to doing 1 damage if you decide to not use them. So generally, that's something that you should be avoiding. But the cool thing about this is that with Preempt and everything else being free, we still have, for example, an AoE sweep over here. We still have stuff like Thunder Wave if we wanted to do long-range snipes, or Dark Blade rather. We have Thunder Wave for more kind of lightning-centric type abilities, whether you needed to hit a water thing particularly hard, or if you just happen to be lightning yourself. So either way, good amount of play there. A good amount of potential options for a unit like this to play around with. So yeah, I think it's pretty darn fun. Basically, just throw the Draconic spells on there for good measure, because why not? And then some Luminant Guards, because of course, you know, you just get free speed whenever you'd like to be all zoomy-like. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and wrap up this fight, and then we'll move on to the next one. I don't know about you, but I can never picture a Lord build running around with Eastern swords without picturing that one scene from Samurai Cop. Like, oh, prove you know Japanese, like, katana means sword, oh my god, this guy totally knows Japanese. Anyway, yeah, that was a totally different friggin' time. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk double attack builds here, since we want to talk about some potential ninja improvements. So we already did the Evanescence thing last time. I just want to see what else we can potentially combine alongside with it, just to kind of see how it goes. Actually, yeah, there we go. There's a kind of funny classic build here. Kind of a weird one. But if you've never tried this, technically you can dual-wield books. Now, effectively what this gives you is the ability to dual-wield books, but the thing is, none of this stuff will matter very much without some sort of multiplier attached to it. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to combine in Berserk, we're going to combine in our book skill, we're going to throw in an additional item to go boost that in just a moment, but we'll also want to, let's say, go over here and probably put on something like a double impact here as well. Actually, no, double impact will end up overriding our double attack, so we don't necessarily need that. Realistically speaking, as far as books go, like, thing is, that bonus right there kind of sucks. So we probably would be better off running double impact and then using just Grand Grimoire or something like that, giving it one of the few use cases where anybody would actually bother with the stupid thing. Though that being said, whatever, we'll just call it good enough. Well, you know, whatever, it'll be fine. Whatever, we'll just use those, and then we'll go ahead and up this to a guaranteed crit instead. So we'll go ahead and put on Sanguine, and then we'll also actually completely forego our book skill in this particular case, because we don't really need those lobber bombs anymore. And then we'll go ahead and put on Mighty Impact. We'll go ahead and give ourselves an MP item here, just kind of, for obvious reasons, we kind of need some of that stuff. So 10% will only put us at 29. If that was enough to generate for one of them, that would be fine, but instead we're just going to go ahead and go for, let's say, Magic Seeds instead. And additionally, let's see, if this guy happens to be able to set himself up, we'll give him an Airy Ion Plume. Presumably, one of his dudes will end up getting knocked down at some point. Actually, we might as well choose a Glass Pumpkin. It is funny how Glass Pumpkins are more common than the MP items. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and put on a Jewel the Avatar for some additional dodge chances. And is there anything else we really want to put in here? Sure, let's pretend his buddy needs a revive or something. We'll slap that sucker in over there. Okay. So now let's go ahead and take a look at what we're looking at here. I think we'll probably just go for a Ring of the Horde here. It'll be decent enough. Okay, so now we need something to slap with books. We'll kind of see how this ends up playing out. And yeah. Okay, so we immediately run into the main downside of a stupid build like this, given that it's only good against, people. So if we're not fighting people, it's gonna be a little bit less than useful. But either way, we have it there if we want to. So we'll go ahead and use this for our additional skills. We'll go ahead and use this Glass Pumpkin for obvious reasons. We'll go ahead and set up our Sanguine and our Mighty Impact. Now, one of the little benefits of this whole thing, though, is that when we are using books in this particularly stupid manner, one thing that we do notice is that we'll be able to safely not worry about counterattacks, which, for some other heavy hitter type of builds might be an issue. Realistically speaking, you shouldn't do this with books. This is strictly just for the purpose of the double book meme. But, sometimes you just gotta do a stupid build, right? Okay, so we'll go ahead and probably collect this MP card over here so that hopefully they end up swarming a little bit closer. We'll go ahead and get our Mighty Impact going at that point. Those two do stack, right? Yeah, Mighty and Sanguine. So we've got those going. And then as soon as the Berserk activates, then we should be all set to go. We'll go ahead and turn on a Gift of Renewal here for the purpose of keeping ourselves relatively tanky, as you do. And they should get pretty close here eventually. Now, why would you ever bother with a build like this? Mostly because this is kind of a standard thing for solo runs. I mean, if you're doing this in a team thing, it's kind of overkill, to be honest. But the main thing is, when it comes to solo runs of Tor, usually if you have any kind of classes that are able to stack up multiple skills like this, that's usually going to be your safest way to ambush stuff. So in this particular case, obviously, we don't really need to do this, but it's just something that we can do. We'll talk about a more effective version of this in just a moment, because that'll basically involve anything but books. We get our Instill Earth there, we get our Berserk, then we go over here, and then we go ahead and see that we can just go ahead and do one of these, and we'll go ahead and do one of those. Thankfully, all of those things still continue on for the second hit, so you can potentially throw out like 2,000, I would say roughly like 2,200-ish once all was said and done there. So that's fine. It is a funny meme build and whatever else, but the main problem is, obviously, it's weak against everything that isn't a people. So we're going to go ahead and just pick another weapon type that has a good racial bonus, but doesn't necessarily have the limitation of having no attack power on top of it. So next thing that we're going to do is take a look at what weapons we've got, because even going down onto something like the Cutlass here is already a massive improvement, and it's basically going to have something very similar as far as its bonus goes. Or not the Cutlass, which one was it? The Shamshur is relatively close-ish. It's 10% less, but still. Let's see. As far as other weapon types go, though, anything with a bigger bonus on top of it would be pretty solid, and on top of that might give us more skills. So this would also open up access to Exorcism, so why not? And then we'll also go ahead and, let's say, what do we want out of here? Probably put on the Brenny for the purpose of getting Resurrect. And then at that point we have double parries. At that point we could go counter and parry in this case, but yeah, Brenny 2 is obviously pretty broken by design, so instead we can go for something like the Lombardia here to give us that counter instead. But again, we're kind of just getting rid of a previous bonus, so that's not necessarily useful. But one thing that can be very useful is to combine this with the Odiferous Waster. Seeing as all these attacks are going to be carrying over into the second attack anyway, there's really nothing wrong with, let's say, taking a Stinky Set build and just making it using like this. That was a weird way to phrase that, but with something like this, not only, obviously, do they have no use for counterattack anymore, but being functionally invisible, what they can do is they can set up their attacks, they can safely sneak up to the front and do one big sweep, and then just leave. They don't necessarily have to worry about any of this other stuff. So, as far as double attackers go, again, one of their main downsides is just the fact that they're leaving themselves out in the open, so this could be a far more effective way to do that. And if you wanted, let's say, some better options for that, maybe you go for something like an axe instead. Maybe going for a rune axe or something. Maybe decide to go for something like a hammer or whatnot. But again, usually if you're looking to do these ambush builds, there's nothing wrong with being invisible for it. That's not necessarily an interesting build in and of itself, but let's go ahead and move on. Is just kind of an interesting use case for something. So, one of the builds that we've mentioned before already is going to be the Slayer Archer, and obviously these are going to be, you have different variations of different ranged attacks in whatever form here, but one of the main problems that this build has is, for example, being able to activate Beast Slayer right away. So technically speaking, there's another build that you can do with the Lord here, to be able to gain access to this pretty much right off the get-go here. So now, in this particular case, I'm going and using the Jigglybow. We probably might get better results using something a bit more specialized. But if you combine in Salvation with their other skills here, you can actually gain access to this stuff pretty much right away. Combine it together with something like Engulf, and you can very oftentimes find yourself getting a very early snipe off without worrying over other additional issues. Alrighty, so next up on the pile is a build that I like to call the Curmudgeon. Now, this is weird, because this is basically a regenerating wizard with a bludgeon. Anyway, the basic idea of this guy is that normally when you have a caster, and they're doing their usual casting thing, it can potentially be a little bit problematic for them to go and do the casting thing. And sure, of course, you could give him, let's say, a heavy weapon with some ability to counter or something. But in this particular case, let's just say that he was a little bit of a pacifist, or he was just worried about being tried for excessive force. So what we've got over here is a guy that's essentially going to be preempting using his Cudgel, using his Damask Mace +1. So this thing is basically a stun baton. There's very few reasons that you'd actually want to use one outside of being a Terenius. Seeing as they can combine it with Fearful Impact to essentially have their extended range on top of being able to stun something there. But the nice little added benefit of this whole thing is that you can still keep your long range here while still going and counterattacking something with a decent chance of inflicting stun and potentially disabling their attack entirely. But seeing as this is Lord, you can also stack double regeneration for the purpose of just kind of shrugging off all of these other attacks. Steel Stance for, once again, shrugging off attacks. Yeah, in general, it's a weird build. It's not exactly going to be the most practical thing, but dang it, sometimes you just really got to work in that Damask Cudgel. This guy is practically unkillable. He's just really annoying about it. So yeah, he can pretty much spend the rest of his time going around and zappifying things to his heart's content, because what exactly are they going to do? So yeah, it's a nice little way of having a sort of defensive spellcaster, as it were. Would I recommend this as a first choice? No, but dang it, it's just fun to run on denim. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Alright, now we can also go a little bit more practical with this here, kind of swapping out a few parts here and there, essentially going for a Damask Sword instead, with a Lombardia for a counter option, and then swapping out some of the other skills for Smokescreen, Evade, Berserk, and the Sword skill here. And primarily the reason for this is just to spread around stun in this case. Obviously you can do this with a lot of different weapons, but I figured this dude's kind of like a sort of a western-looking samurai type situation, and that works out reasonably well enough. Now, nothing wrong with putting first aid on this, but the combination of a parry as well as eventually we're going to have a Smokescreen on there will help a decent bit. I did experiment around with going and throwing Repel Beast on there, but completely forgot that it also prevents counterattacks, just like Phalanx, which is a little bit of a bummer, although it also does help with recruiting, so there's that as well. Anyway, spring, stun, and false strike like this is a good little way to sort of get a bit of a slow, insidious advantage over time. Again, if you're doing a solo run or something. I mean, basically, if you manage to get to the point of having Lord when you're going and doing a solo run, you probably don't really need any stupid builds to make it any different anyway. But anyways, that's about all I got time for here today. Basically, it's been a bit of a crazy day. Anyway, y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you for stopping by, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.